Good evening. Over in the state of Texas, they have just completed phase 1 of the election audit that they started all the way back in October of 2021. And according to this report, which was just released by the Secretary of State's office, they have discovered over 11,000 potential non-citizens who were registered to vote. Meanwhile, over in the state of Georgia, they are likewise launching an election investigation of their own, specifically into the possibly illegal ballot harvesting which took place during the 2020 general election. And then lastly, in a book which was just published by the National Geographic about Egypt, the author claimed that Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 black men while allegedly waging a glorious race war on behalf of white power. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion over in Texas. So, in case you're not aware, the Texas Secretary of State's office, they have been running what they call a forensic audit of the 2020 general election since October of last year. Although whether this actually qualifies as a forensic audit is debatable. We'll get to that in a moment. Regardless, though, 5 days ago, the office released their initial findings, which stated that, among several other problems, they found over 11,000 potential non-citizens who were registered to vote. Although it is worth noting that this particular audit, was only being conducted in 4 Texas counties, in Collin, Dallas, Harris, as well as Tarrant counties, which together they account for about 10 million people, or about a third of Texas's overall population. Now let's go through some of the specific findings that the investigators discovered when actually going through the data. To start with, overall in the entire state, they found 11,737 potential non-U.S. citizens who were registered to vote. And when you look at those 4 counties that they were specifically investigating, that figure breaks down into 327 in Collin County, 1,385 in Dallas County, 3,063 in Harris County, as well as 708 in Tarrant County. The rest were scattered throughout the entire state. Now, as of today, only Dallas County has actually done anything with this information. Dallas County, they removed about 86% of these potentially non-U.S. citizens from their voter rolls, and they are still investigating the remaining 14% of these alleged non-U.S. citizens who were registered to vote in Dallas County. The other 3 counties, they have yet to take any significant action in regards to these specific findings. Now, besides these potential non-citizens, the audit also discovered quite a lot of deceased individuals who were registered to vote at the time of the 2020 general election. Specifically, the investigators found that since November of 2020, a total of 224,585 deceased voters were removed from their voter rolls across the entire state of Texas. And then when you dig into these 4 counties specifically, here's what you find. After November of 2020, Collin County removed 4,889 dead voters, Dallas County removed 14,926 dead voters, Harris County removed 23,914 dead voters, and Tarrant County, they removed 13,955 dead voters. Now, the fact that these counties removed these dead individuals after the election is not necessarily an indication of any kind of wrongdoing. I mean, people do, of course, die, and then they need to be removed from the voter rolls, which might take a little bit of time. In fact, in regards to how many of these dead individuals actually cast a ballot in the Texas election, well, according to this audit report, they only found 67 potential votes which were cast in the names of deceased individuals. And out of those 67 votes, which occurred across the entire state of Texas, here's what they found in regards to these 4 counties that they highlighted. 3 votes over in Collin County, 9 votes over in Dallas County, 4 votes in Harris County, and 1 vote over in Tarrant County. Now, the audit team says that they are still currently investigating these potentially dead voters, but obviously, even if those numbers are accurate, they would not have skewed the election one way or the other because they were so minuscule. And then lastly, the investigators compared 2 sets of numbers for each county. Basically, the discrepancy between how many ballots there were when you looked at the electronic count versus when you looked at the hand count. And apparently, there were discrepancies that still need to be investigated during the second phase of the audit. Now, in presenting this report, here's what the Texas Secretary of State's office sent to us here at the Epoch Times in a statement. Generally speaking, nothing was found on such a large scale that could have altered any election. And when you actually look at the data that is presented in this phase 1 report, that indeed seems to be the case, because even in the worst case scenario, the margin of victory in Texas would not have been altered. Regardless, though, no amount of potential fraud is too small, and therefore the Secretary of State's office said that they are moving the audit into the second phase. Now, While generally Democrat lawmakers in the state of Texas, they generally oppose this audit altogether, there are also some Republicans who are opposing it as well, because they say it does not go far enough. For instance, Mr. Stephen Toth, who is a Texas state representative, he's a Republican, and he called this investigation more of a risk-limiting exercise rather than an audit. And he expressed concerns that it won't adequately address all of the 2020 election problems. Here's specifically what he said. We know that fraud has been taking place in Texas. We need a forensic audit. On the flip side, however, Mr. Paul Betancourt, who is a Texas state senator, he's also a Republican, and he said that even though the investigation could be conducted in a much more deeper way, he did also say that the current audit has, quote, the potential to become a full forensic audit during phase 2 if it begins to dig into voting irregularities. Although very tellingly, Senator Betancourt did mention that there were some glaring irregularities that are not covered by this current audit, such as an alleged situation over in Wichita Falls, which is a town in Texas, where a single-family residence was the official home to more than 500 registered voters. Regardless, though, the Texas Secretary of State's office, they said that indeed the current investigation is, in fact, a forensic exercise, and that during the second phase of the audit, their teams will be conducting on-site examinations in order to compare the machine tabulations with the actual paper ballots. Here's in fact how Mr. John Scott, who is the Texas Secretary of State, here's what he said in this regards in a statement. This is the most comprehensive forensic audit of the 2020 election. We'll use analytical tools to examine the literal nuts and bolts of election administration to determine if any illegal activity may have occurred. And so we'll just have to wait until phase 2 of their investigation is complete to determine whether the description of this audit is accurate or not. Until then, if you would like to read the actual findings of the phase 1 part of this investigation, I will throw a link to the PDF version of this report into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, before we move on over and discuss how a new election investigation has just sprung up over in Georgia, specifically around potential illegal ballot harvesting that was done in the 2020 general election, I'd like to take a super quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, and I will do so from the sound booth. That's right, Roman. The sponsor of today's episode is an awesome company called AMAC. That's AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. Now, what I learned earlier today, though, is that you don't actually need to be a mature American citizen yourself in order to join AMAC, because even though they're an organization that's geared towards people who are 50 years of age and above, you can actually join at any age as long as you're a American-loving patriot. And so what they say is that as our fundamental freedoms here in this country are being threatened by politicians who don't even necessarily know how to balance their own checking accounts, and as there is a concerted effort to censor conservatives by this woke ideology, one thing that you can do to fight back is to join the 2 million people who are already members of AMAC. And by joining, you'll have access to 3 main benefits. The first benefit is the money-saving benefit, because by joining, you'll have access to discounts on things like vitamins, restaurants, retail shops throughout the entire country. Second of all, you will gain access to the AMAC website, the AMAC app, as well as the AMAC magazine, which gives you something that the mainstream media doesn't, which is honest news that is grounded in facts. And third of all, and this is what a lot of people say is their favorite benefit, is that AMAC has your back over on Capitol Hill. Because with 2 million freedom-loving members, they are a voice for conservatives that cannot be ignored. And so if you are a person who considers themselves a constitutional conservative, then I would consider joining AMAC. You can do so over at amac.us. That's amac.us. So consider signing up, consider helping AMAC's effort, and getting access to these excellent membership benefits. So AMAC, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over to Georgia, where the Secretary of State's office has just initiated an investigation into potentially illegal ballot harvesting in the 2020 election. Now, let me give you a bit of background on this particular investigation. True the Vote, which is an organization focused on election integrity, they submitted a complaint to the Georgia Secretary of State's office, which detailed the digital data of 242 people who are making visits to drop boxes in order to dump mail-in ballots. And according to their complaint, about 40% of these trips occurred sometime between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. Here's specifically what part of their complaint said. From this, we have thus far developed precise patterns of life for 242 suspected ballot traffickers in Georgia and 202 traffickers in Arizona. According to the data, each trafficker went to an average of 23 ballot drop boxes. Now, specifically, according to documents which were reviewed by Breitbart News, what True the Vote did was that they spent several months collecting over 27 terabytes of geospatial cell phone data, as well as cell phone temporal data, between October 1st and November 6th of the year 2020 in specific areas of Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, as well as Texas. And then specifically, the data that they were collecting included certain geofenced points of interest. Things like ballot drop box locations, UPS stores, and the addresses of NGOs, and so on. And then using the cell phone ping data, they were able to piece together the fact that several hundred people who are suspected to be ballot harvesters, they were making multiple trips to multiple drop box locations. And by the way, it is worth noting that unlike in California, the practice of ballot harvesting is illegal in the state of Georgia. And so, after gathering all this cell phone data, according to the documents, which were once again examined by Breitbart News, True the Vote then began to collect surveillance footage of the different drop box locations. And according to their documents, they eventually collected over 2 million minutes of video, which purportedly shows the same people going multiple times to the same Dropbox locations. Here's what one of their documents said in this particular regard, quote, "We are building out video stories and have compiled videos of individuals stuffing ballot drop boxes with stacks of ballots, individuals depositing ballots in multiple drop boxes, unauthorized coordination between government workers engaged in the exchange of ballots, and several other tranches of video that capture unusual patterns such as the wearing of gloves to deposit ballots, taking pictures of ballot deposits, etc." And now, based on their collection of evidence, the Georgia Secretary of State's office has officially opened their own investigation. Here is what Mr. Brad Raffensperger, who is the Georgia Secretary of State, here's what he said on the matter. "We do have some information, and we are going to investigate that. We did deploy drop boxes that were under 24/7 surveillance, and because they were, then that really, can indicate who dropped that information off, and we're really just going through that." Mr. Raffensperger then also confirmed to Just the News that he will likely seek subpoenas from the state election board in order to secure more evidence. Now, after this new investigation was announced, True the Vote released a statement saying this in part. After a year's worth of research and analysis, True the Vote submitted 3 official complaints to the Georgia Secretary of State's office regarding occurrences in the 2020 general and the 2021 runoff elections. As a result, on January 3rd, 2022, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger announced a statewide investigation into ballot trafficking in Georgia. Shockingly, similar findings will soon be released to appropriate authorities in 5 additional states. And so it looks like we have quite a bit to look forward to in the coming weeks. Until then, if you would like to read more about this investigation methods that True the Vote used over in Georgia, as well as this new investigation that was just opened by the Secretary of State's office, I'll throw all those documents into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now let's talk about revisionist history. And to start with, there was a great quote I read not too long ago. It said this: "If the news is fake, imagine how bad history is." And the reason that I bring up that quote is because I was reminded of it just earlier today. Why? Well, it turns out in a history book about ancient Egypt that was just published by the National Geographic, there is a claim that Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 black men. Let me just repeat that. In a book that was published by the National Geographic on the topic of ancient Egypt, they mentioned that Kyle Rittenhouse, and they say it as a matter of fact, that he shot and killed 2 black men. This is despite the fact, as you likely know, that Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 white men in self-defense. Regardless, though, the history book says otherwise. Now, specifically, the book in question here is called The Good Kings: Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World, written by an Egyptologist named Kara Cooney. And in the book, here's specifically what Ms. Cooney wrote. Or consider 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who used a semi-automatic weapon to kill 2 black men in Kenosha, Wisconsin, while waging a glorious race war on behalf of his inherited white power. That's not to mention the white people who rallied behind him to post bail. Fear has gripped the patriarchy, and the threat of righteous violence, or the lethal use of it, is the patriarchy's response. That amazing paragraph, by the way, appears in the last chapter of the book, titled Smashing the Patriarchy. And besides the obviously wrong detail about the 2 black men who were killed, it is also unclear how she exactly justifies the statement that Kyle Rittenhouse's shooting was done while, quote, waging a glorious race war on behalf of his inherited white power. I guess we just have to take that as a fact. Now, thus far, the National Geographic has not released any statements on whether they stand behind this author and the false claim. However, Ms. Cooney herself, facing quite a bit of backlash online, she released a statement on Twitter saying this: "On page 341 of The Good Kings, I state that Kyle Rittenhouse shot 2 black men when instead he shot 2 white men. That was my mistake, and I apologize. The response has been a hateful stew of ridicule and denial that America has a race problem at all. If one mistake in a little-known book about ancient Egypt elicits this much howling, it is to avoid discussing our larger problem, to avoid seeing our deep-seated obsession with patriarchal power. So yeah, tiny detail of the book with a big mistake about a massive American issue, and that's on me. But the white supremacy is still a problem, and the misogyny is still a problem." Now that is a rather amazing statement, both apologizing for the factual error, but then also shifting the blame to society at large. Regardless, if you'd like to read more about this particular case, I will throw all the details into the description box below this video for you to check out further. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, take a moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, since you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you go on over to Epoch TV and check out an awesome episode of Crossroads, where Josh interviews Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, who is the Director of Medical Ethics, who was recently fired from the University of California, and they discuss how science is being weaponized by politics in order to create medical dystopia. Here's a trailer for that episode.
Technocracy is the science of social engineering. We can see this now constantly all over the world.
This is vaccine tyranny, high-tech tyranny, and other things.
Canada has been tracking cell phones ever since COVID started. China is a great example, social engineering. You can't move left, right, up, down, sideways, nothing without being told what you can and cannot do.
What does social engineering mean when applied to politics?
The people that are really exercising the power are not the leaders of government. It's the people standing right behind them that are feeding them the policies that are getting worked out of the society. The technocrats of the world have taken over the mechanism of government to achieve their personal goals.
If you'd like to check out that full episode, as well as all the other phenomenal content over on Epoch TV, I'll put a link to it. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. Hope you click on it. Hope you check it out. Hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, if you have a Telegram account, consider following us at FactsMatter_Roman. We'll post the links to all of our videos, so in case anything ever happens here on YouTube, you can always find us on there. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.